Survival. As you know, we've talked about the psychological problems of getting lost and what you could do to build a fire, sit down, calm the self, take inventory. We've talked about a survival kit, the need for a kit, the items in a kit. And now we need to talk about something very serious before we get into our fire building, because it leads up to the need for a fire again. Another need. Hypothermia. Hypothermia is best explained, I think, by telling you that it's the lack of the body's ability to continue to produce body heat in sufficient quantities to keep the body temperature up to a point to where the organs, the major organs of the body, can function. Certainly hypothermia is a new word to most people. We used to call it dying of exposure. And dying of exposure, many of us misunderstood. Here in the mountain country, we often thought of dying of exposure as freezing to death, literally. But we know more now about hypothermia than we used to, and we understand now that allowing the body temperature to reduce to 79 degrees under any season, under any condition, the major organs of the body cease to function, and brother, you're dead. So, we realize now that hypothermia can be a problem to you in either summer or winter. And we can again see the need now for a steady intake into your system of good food. Food that will, again, through the metabolism of the body, produce body heat so that we can produce the necessary energy, the heat, to keep the body temperature above that critical point. Let me show you a couple of charts that may help us understand some of the things that we really need know about hypothermia. Factors resulting in hypothermia can be a change in temperature, a severe change in temperature, the type of clothing you're wearing, whether it's warm, adequate, or maybe you've taken some of the clothing off and you caught yourself on a mountaintop with nothing but shorts or a very thin shirt and inadequate clothing for the conditions prevailing. Wind conditions. Wind can draw away, blow away, suck off, and dissipate the body heat, something fierce. Wind conditions are a major factor in the conditions of hypothermia. Altitude. Certainly altitude, from the bottom of the valley floors to the top of the high mountain peaks, makes a great difference in what we consider the major factors resulting in hypothermia. Now, let's don't confuse hypothermia with other things that we treat for out of doors. First of all, frostbite. Here we treat frostbite by warming, not by rubbing snow, as many people have thought for many years. Snow is nothing but frozen water with sharp edges and does nothing but have an abrasive action on the skin. Heat exhaustion. Here a person is usually down but sweating profusely. Don't confuse that with heat stroke, where a person is perhaps down but dry, the body temperature has risen, and can be fatal unless you, through water or ice or some artificial means, bring the body temperature down quickly. Then, of course, there's hypothermia. Hypothermia, where the body temperature has dropped below the desirable point, and here we must raise the body heat, bring the body heat back up, artificially or however, to keep it from that critical temperature of 79 degrees or near that. Symptoms of hypothermia can be shivering, uncontrollable shivering, feeling drowsy and confused, just not being able to make decisions and do things correctly, stumbling, falling over, with a finger, not being able to hold on to things, such a simple thing as tying a knot. These are conditions indicating hypothermia. Loss of muscular control, fatigue, and numbness, and the advanced stages of hypothermia is incoherence. When that happens, you're near death. At first, the signs of hypothermia would be, you should ingest something warm, get something, soup, bouillon, something warm into the system, warm the person with artificial means, blankets, clothing, or if nothing else, just wrapping yourself or several people around the person and using your own body heat. Maintain warmth and produce heat by fire or any other means to bring that body temperature back up to something comfortable. give hot drinks, treat for shock, treat for frostbite if necessary, thinking that many of these conditions happen during very cold weather, keep the victim warm, and generate heat. So, hypothermia, as we can see, is certainly something more than just dying of exposure. We know more about it now, know how to treat it, know the signs of it. So watch for it when you're outdoors. Okay, now, we're going to talk about fire. We can see that the hypothermia problem certainly gives need for a fire to help bring up the body heat. And we have several methods we'd like to show you for building fire. First of all, the old mountain man, we talked about his ability in survival because he had to live survival every day. And from his possibles bag, or what we might today call his survival kit, he had many tricks to build fire. First of all, he'd have a small magnifying glass on his person, as we've illustrated earlier. This was made specifically for the purpose of building fire. However, today, magnifying glasses could be obtained from many sources. As an example, we could take a magnifying glass from the lens out of a rifle, the lens out of a binocular, or the lens out of a camera. Any of these lenses will work in helping you build a fire with a magnifying glass. Here's another idea. If you haven't the means of removing from a binocular or a scope a magnifying glass, you can buy one of the small, very inexpensive plastic magnifying glasses in a 5 and dime store. Or even without that, those of us that would wear glasses find that with the plastic frames especially, it's very easy to remove the lens from a set of eyeglasses, and by placing the two lenses together with a curvature up on the top one, the curvature down on the bottom one, and if at all possible, fill the lower lens, a concave surface inside the lower lens, with water, liquid, saliva, could be even urine, any clear or semi-clear liquid that would fill the concave surface of the bottom lens will add to the magnifying power, and in the light of the sun, bringing it to a very fine pinpoint of light on your tinder, it'll very quickly start things smoking. Now, most of us have had a chance of doing this when we were youngsters, playing with a magnifying glass and bringing something under the magnifying glass to a very fine point of heat and causing it then to light into fire. Now, to show you another method the mountain man used, let me show you first of all his flint and steel set. Mountain man's flint and steel set consisted first of all of a metal box that inside he carried a piece of flint, a striking steel, and charred cloth. Now, charred cloth is the real secret to this method. Charred cloth can be made out of nothing more than just some cotton patching, rifle cleaning patches, or any cotton material. Now, cotton is necessary. Synthetic fibers will not work. Let me repeat, they will not work. They'll just melt, they'll not carry the spark and blow into a hot source of heat, because fire requires now three things. We need heat, we need fuel, we need oxygen. Charred cloth produces the heat. To make charred cloth, we just need to put several pieces of cotton in a tin can, throw it in the campfire, and watch it until the tin can turns just red hot, and then just scrape it out and let it just sit until it cools. Opening it up, you'll have charred cloth. Now, in addition to the charred cloth, the mountain man would usually carry with him a bundle of tinder. Now, the tinder could be any real dry fibrous substance. It could be dried grass, dried leaves shredded fine, but the mountain man, as well as the modern-day camper or backpacker who uses this method, prefers the inner bark of trees. Now, this is the inner bark of a cottonwood tree. But here in the West, we have a tree that gives a fantastic tinder, the cedar tree, juniper tree. Most of us call it just the plain old cedar tree. This outer bark of the cedar tree, when shredded up very fine, and all we need to do is just take a piece of it and shred it between the hands in a rolling motion such as that, and you see how fine it shreds. And by building it into a little bird's nest, and the mountain men, of course, used to use real bird's nests when they could find them because they were already prepared tinder, but just building them into a small bird's nest, we can build ourselves a real fine tinder ball. But I'm going to use the old cottonwood bark as the mountain man did. And I'll take a piece of my charred cloth, place right down in the middle of it. I'll take another piece of charred cloth, and I'll fold it into about 4 little squares. And then with my finger, I'll rough up the edges of the charred cloth so that it'll catch a spark easily. I take a piece of my flint, find a real good sharp edge, place my charred cloth right alongside the sharp edge, and with my steel, I'll then just strike a good hot spark. You can see it glowing. Now place that right down in the middle of my bird's nest and a piece of charred cloth already placed there. With it held high so that you're blowing the heat up through the tinder and the smoke escaping above you, when you take another breath, you'll not be sucking in smoke. And when you get fire, you get a whole handful of fire. By having your fire material all ready, some red pine placed in a position in your fire pit, having your other kindling materials laid alongside so that you can go from the finest to the heaviest as your fire progresses, that quick you've got a fire with nothing more than flint and steel, as you see. So building a fire with flint and steel is very easy. Now, other things we could build a fire with, we'd like to demonstrate by first having you join me in walking over to another fellow officer, and this is Mr. Steve Phillips. Officer Phillips, what have we got in the way of fire building here that you're going to demonstrate for us?
Well, Lee, we've got some methods we'd like to talk to you about, other ways to start a fire that a sportsman could use very effectively, anyone out of doors could use effectively in a survival situation. We've got, first of all, we'd like to talk a little bit about starting a fire with something you wouldn't think would be flammable at all, and that's steel wool, material that burns very readily, as you're going to see.
Steve, we talked about this in our survival kit and mentioned, and we should mention again, that double-aught steel wool or finer is used, but you were talking to me about steel wool has been treated.
Right. It's very important that the wool that you use not be treated with any kind of a resin. If it is, it's not going to burn at all. So you've got to be careful that the wool that you use is an uncoated kind of wool, and this will burn just fantastically. Now, we're going to take some of this wool from the material here. We're going to start it with the metal mats, which you've talked about before in the first show, I believe. This is an item that any sportsman or anyone going out of doors can purchase in any sporting goods store, hardware store. It's a very effective little tool for starting a fire.
We're going to use a little bird's nest of...
Yeah, we're going to take some of this steel wool here. We'll just set it down here on the rock here, and we'll nestle some of your cedar bark around it here.
Can I hold that for you so they can see from the camera the
why don't
steel
you
wool?
do that?
Okay.
We'll...
and as soon as it lights, you grab it, huh?
Okay. Okay. Here we go.
There you go.
And we got fire.
Yeah, we've got fire that quick. Now, one advantage of steel wool, Steve, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be dry to use.
That's right. That's right. We'll show you what you can do. If you're caught out, especially in a rainstorm, that's the real advantage of this material. It burns whether it's soaking wet or bone dry. Got a cup of water here. Well, that's a good fire, isn't it?
Isn't that good and warm?
Yeah. Take this wool and we'll soak it thoroughly in the water.
Now let me examine that, make sure you got it good and wet.
It's dripping.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure everybody can see that I'm
what you want to do,
squeezing water out of that.
Yeah. What you want to do here, even though you want to wring out as much of this water as you can, get it as dry as you can. It's still going to be wet. But we'll just quickly try and get some of this excess water wrung out.
Now the idea here is that the steel wool will suspend water between the fibers, but it won't absorb moisture into the fibers.
That's right, Lee. And I think we'll get a fire here.
Again, we're just using this as a heat source.
That's right. Just going to show you how you can kindle a fire with the wool. We've lost our tinder here. We'll have to build again. Okay, let's see if we can get her to go again. Whoops, we had her. Lost it.
This is something maybe while we're waiting we should mention, that none of these methods work all the time. That you may have failures, and this is why we feel that in any survival kit you should have more than one means of building a fire. Don't rely on just one, because there are failures.
That's right. Now, with this wool, though, I think if we're just a little patient, I keep stroking here, we'll get it. Why don't you hold it right there for me?
Ah, there we go. Just had to get that little bit of extra moisture out of it.
That's right. That's a good hot fire you can see, and that'll kindle about any kind of tinder that you would have. So,
and again, we ought to remind our audience that to build a fire, we need three things. A heat source, which you've just provided.
Right.
Good fuel, which our red pine and our kindling and whatnot has already been prepared. So that the minute you get flame, you've got the fuel to add to it to bring it up to a nice, good flame and secure a flame and make sure you've got a good fire going. And then keep it going with whatever heavy wood or as large a fire as you need. And in addition to that, we need oxygen. We need heat, fuel, and oxygen. Of course, we've got oxygen all around us here in our air. And I see you got an old tire patching kit.
Yeah, this is another one, and this is an item that most sportsmen ought to have in their vehicle. Tire patching kit. In this kit, there's an old, just about wrung out tube of glue here.
Now on that tube of glue, I see a little red warning there that says warning, extremely flammable.
Right. And we got enough here probably to get one good lick here. Let's see what we can find here. We'll squeeze a little bit of this out on the rock here. Now this too, we're going to start with the metal match, if I can get the right stroke here.
Okay.
That's ought to be enough to get us going here. Okay. Whoops. Well, that doesn't need to be.
There we go. And again, we've got the heat source. And
yeah, now that'll burn for quite a few seconds there.
And anything you put over that that's dry, tinder, away we go.
Just build a fire from that. Now that's very effective. Now,
what have you got shot shells for over there?
Yeah, that's the next thing we'd like to talk about. We have another way that old-timers used to keep warm out in the waterfowl marsh when they were out and maybe caught in a blizzard, or they were out hunting when it was extremely cold and the danger of frostbite was present. And they used to take the old paper shot shells that we don't see too much anymore, and they would split these this way and just light the ends and use these, set them down in the grass there on the brass end, and use this as a...
and the wax coat of paper would burn.
The wax coat of paper burns beautifully, and they would use it for a hand warmer. Well, nowadays we don't have the paper cases anymore, but we do have the plastic cases, and one way that you can make a very effective little pocket warmer out of one of these shells is to take and fill up the empty shell with rifle cleaning patches, anything cotton, something of this nature. Then soak the material with kerosene, and then it's kind of like a little candle. We'll show you. This is
seal it up and put a daub of wax on the end of it to keep it watertight.
This is one that's been opened up, as you can see. You pull a little end of that out and kind of use it as a wick.
Okay.
You hold on to that. We'll again strike it with the metal match, and I think you'll see that we can get a real nice little pocket warmer out of this thing here.
Pull it out so we can get some.
Okay. It's so good. This one's been around for a while. We've been working with it, and apparently it doesn't want to go too quickly.
There we go. Beautiful.
Well, that's soaked with kerosene, and you can see if you keep them fresh, and this one's been, as I say, been with us for a while.
Now we're burning what, a half a dozen or more patches there.
Right.
One patch or even a quarter of a patch would work to build a fire.
That's right. It doesn't take much.
So a shot shell case has many as
build a little fire
8 or 10 fires.
Right. So
Steve, thank you.
Well, thank you, Lee.
Let's walk over here now, and let me introduce you to another one of our officers. This is Chris Chafin.
Hi, Lee.
Howdy, Officer Chafin. What do you got for us over here?
We've got a couple other techniques that might be interesting for outdoorsmen to be aware of. Probably one of the most unique is the fact that almost every sportsman has some source of electricity around him when he's outside, whether it be flashlight batteries, car battery, batteries out of a battery-powered lantern, or what have you. And these are sources of electricity which can give you a source of heat. Let me show you an example. Let's go back to the steel wool like you and Steve have been talking about, and show you how you can start a fire with steel wool and 2 batteries. Put the batteries together just the same way they go inside of a flashlight, and ground the end good on the bottom, holding it there with your little finger, and then just rubbing this over the other terminal on the top. You can get a slight spark, which you can turn into a fire just the same way we did with the other heat source.
There we go. Boy, look how quick that was. And there again, we're using batteries that, how fresh are these, by the way?
These batteries are about 2 years old, Lee. Now, when they were taken out of the flashlight, originally, the light given off by the flashlight was only a very, very pale orange light. Not enough to do you any good to find your way down a trail or find anything in your car, but obviously still good for something. Good enough for an electricity source there to start a campfire with.
So even
keep
though
yourself warm.
The flashlight may be worn out, the battery may be worn out, they still have enough energy to light us a fire.
That's right. Another good source to hang on to there. There's several other things that sportsmen are using now that are kind of interesting. One of which might be a real handy thing for people to carry with them. See if we can get the camera to take a look at these. These are carbide crystals. Very small little crystals, but they seem to work better when they're wet than when they're dry.
In other words, this is a wet weather fire builder.
It is in that. And you see, you don't need to carry very many of them, so it's not very heavy. See if I can give you a little demonstration here of how these things will work. It's not exactly kosher, I expect, to expectorate on Stevie, but we'll just use this to get these
You mean you're going to spit on the rocks?
I'm going to spit on the rocks, yeah. Okay. I tried to put it daintily. Here we go. Now we'll go to the steel match again, like Steve was using.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if the camera could pick that up, but there was a definite flame there.
Yes, there was. And a little more water on there.
Yeah, I think a little more water. Let's try it again.
There we go.
There we go.
You bet. And the more water you get on there, the more flame you get.
Right.
The more acetylene gas it gives off.
Right. Excellent technique. Now, one of the other things for those sportsmen who like to kind of prepare before they get out into the wood is a new little technique using fiberboard, some paraffin wax, and some matches to make waterproof matches. They take the fiberboard, using a pocket knife or a file, dig out a little hole, little groove here in the center where some matches can be placed, and then putting 2 of these together, like so, coating them with the paraffin wax, melted paraffin wax, like this, you get a double.
What would you do? Just submerge it in a pot of melted wax?
Just melt some wax, put it inside there, and let it get a coat on there, and then pull it back out and let it dry. Very simple. Now, when you get in the wood, all you have to do is pry this open, and what you come out with is waterproof matches. Very simple to use. Start your fire any way you could with a normal heat source with matches.
Sounds great.
A lot of good techniques to use.
You bet. Well, gee, that gives us some idea of some of the techniques that have been used by many people. I have a couple more here we'd like to show you. First of all, we know that matches are old standby, and matches should be waterproofed with a number of things before carrying into the field. Matches can be waterproofed by painting them with lacquer, shellac, paint, fingernail polish, or dipping them full length in hot melted paraffin wax. Now, of all of the techniques, I prefer dipping them in hot melted paraffin wax. The reason being that by doing so, you're adding fuel to the fire, because when you light it, not only does the flame burn much hotter, much longer, and gives you a much better chance of building a fire. So in carrying matches into the field, they should be carried in a waterproof container, and they should be waterproof before placing in the container. A lot of people say, well, do you really feel it's necessary to waterproof the matches and then carry them in a container? Well, I certainly do. What happens when you meet a buddy on the mountaintop or a stranger who doesn't have any matches, and you take them out of the waterproof container and share about half of them with him? and he doesn't have a container to put them in, you have given him some means of protection for those matches, you see, by having them already waterproofed. So, yes, by all means, waterproof them before putting them in a waterproof container. Then, a match that you may be interested in today is a very clever match. This is called a windproof match. It's now being imported out of Italy, and, whoop, I broke that one off. Let me get you another one. These are being imported out of Italy. They're a little expensive, but I really think they're worth it when you see they just won't blow out. So it does make a very good match. One other item you might consider as a fire starter, and that's the rifle you're packing. By taking the cartridge, putting the bullet in the barrel, and prying the cartridge back and forth until you can remove the bullet from the neck, pour the powder out into some steel wool, leaving about a dozen granules of powder left inside. Take a little tiny pad of steel wool, about the size of a thumbnail, and put it down inside. By placing this back into the gun, aiming the barrel at the steel wool and pulling the trigger, you'll actually fire that little tiny ball of steel wool out of the gun, glowing into your pad of steel wool. And of course, you've seen what happens there. Okay? We've shown you a lot of ways of building a fire. Carry several in your kit. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.